Welcome to Dark Deeds and Conspiracy, the podcast that unearths chilling true crimes and mind-bending conspiracies. Each episode, we explore a dark corner of history or a mystery that still haunts us today. Let's dive in.
Okay, so March 31st, 1922. Mark that date, because on that day, on that seemingly ordinary day, at an isolated farmstead called Hinterkaifeck in Bavaria, Germany, one of the most chilling and stubbornly unsolved crimes in German history began to unfold. 6 lives were brutally taken, and the mystery of who did it and why continues to haunt us over a century later.
Welcome, everyone. It's good to be back. It's incredible, right?
Wow.
We're going to delve into the stack of information surrounding the Hinterkaifeck murders today. Our mission is to extract the most important and intriguing nuggets from this enduring enigma. So think of this as a shortcut to understanding the core of this haunting case without being overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information and speculation that has accumulated over the decades.
Exactly. We want to give you the crucial pieces of this puzzle in sharp focus. So picture this scene. Andreas Gruber. He was 63 years old, the head of the household. His 72-year-old wife, Cecilia Gruber, their widowed 35-year-old daughter, Victoria Gabriel, and Victoria's 2 young children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph. And tragically, they weren't the only victims. The new maid, Maria Baumgartner, had just arrived that day. All 6 met a horrific end, murdered with what is believed to be a mattock, a tool similar to a pickaxe.
The nature of the crime is particularly disturbing. The prevailing theory is that 4 of the victims were lured into the barn and killed there one after the other. Then the killer or killers went inside the house to murder the maid and young Joseph as they slept. It just suggests a level of calculated brutality that is deeply unsettling.
And what makes this case even more perplexing are the strange events that preceded that horrific night. We're talking about footprints in the snow that went only to the house with no return tracks, footsteps heard in the attic when no one was supposed to be there, an unfamiliar Munich newspaper turning up, and a detail that always sends chills down the spine: the previous maid quitting her job 6 months prior, claiming the house was haunted. Okay, let's start to unpack this. It gets strange fast.
It certainly does, and the discovery of the bodies days later only deepens the mystery. Neighbors grew concerned by the unusual silence and the family's absence. What they found was a scene of unimaginable horror, but combined with elements of a bizarre normalcy. Cows had been milked, meals had been prepared and eaten, the dog had been fed. This strongly suggests that the killer or killers remain on the farm for days after committing these atrocious acts. So what does that suggest to you?
It's like a macabre daily routine playing out in the shadow of this brutal crime, almost as if the perpetrator felt they had a right to be there. And to really understand the isolation, I think you need to understand exactly where Hinterkaifeck was. It wasn't a village. It was the local name for a very remote farm, situated about a kilometer, just over half a mile, behind the small hamlet of Kaifeck near Grobern in Bavaria. So imagine being truly cut off.
Precisely. Think of it as being in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense forests and open fields. The farm buildings, the living quarters, the barn, the stable were all connected. A typical Bavarian layout designed for self-sufficiency, but in this case, a significant vulnerability because of its isolation. You really get the sense that in such a remote location, screams could easily go unheard, and help would be a long time coming.
Absolutely. Now let's try to piece together the chilling timeline. In the days and weeks leading up to March 31st, those unsettling events we've touched on were already occurring. Andreas Gruber finding those mysterious one-way footprints in the snow, discovering a broken lock on the tool shed, the family hearing those phantom footsteps in the attic, and that Munich newspaper appearing inexplicably despite no one subscribing. And of course, the previous maid's sudden departure because she felt the house was haunted. So here's where it gets really disturbing when we look at the sequence of events.
Then comes March 31st, the night of the murders. The prevailing theory, and what seems most plausible given the layout, is that the 4 older members of the family, Andreas, Cecilia, Senior Victoria, and young Cecilia, were lured into the barn, likely through the stable. It's speculated the killer might have used sounds or feigned concern for the animals to draw them in one by one. Inside the enclosed space of the barn, they were brutally attacked with the mattock, suffering fatal head injuries. It seems like a deliberate act targeting them in a confined area.
And the detail about 7-year-old Cecilia is particularly heartbreaking. The autopsy revealed she may have lived for hours after the initial attack, and in her unimaginable agony, she pulled out clumps of her own hair. It paints a truly horrifying picture of her final moments, a child suffering in the dark.
Following the murders in the barn, the killer or killers then entered the house. Maria Baumgartner, the newly arrived maid, had only been there for a matter of hours, And 2-year-old Joseph, likely asleep and completely defenseless in his crib, were also murdered with the same brutal weapon, highlighting a complete lack of mercy and a determination to eliminate all occupants of the farm.
Then we enter this incredibly eerie 3-day period, from April 1st to the 3rd. Despite the 6 deaths, smoke was seen rising from the chimney. Neighbors noticed the cows were being milked, the dog had been fed, even bread had been baked and meals had been eaten. It's most unbelievable, isn't it? This continuation of daily life amidst such utter tragedy, strongly suggesting the killer or someone involved remained on the farm. So what kind of mindset does that imply to you?
It suggests a chilling level of detachment, or perhaps a disturbing sense of ownership over the property and even the fate of the victims. It raises a profound question for us all: what kind of individual could commit such an act and then reside alongside their victims for days, continuing the mundane tasks of farm life? It's deeply unsettling and points to a perpetrator with a highly unusual psychological profile.
Finally, on April 4th, the outside world thankfully intervenes. A mechanic, Albert Hoffner, arrived at the farm for scheduled work. Finding no one about, he became increasingly concerned. He alerted neighbors, including Lorenz Schlittenbauer, and a search party was quickly formed. It was this group who made the gruesome discovery: the bodies hidden under hay in the barn, and then the maid and young Joseph inside the house. Can you imagine the horror they must have encountered?
The subsequent investigation by the standards of 1922 was unfortunately fraught with issues which significantly hampered any chance of solving this crime definitively. The crime scene was significantly compromised from the outset. Numerous people, including the initial discoverers, had entered the property, moved bodies, and even touched items before the authorities arrived. This undoubtedly led to the loss or contamination of crucial potential evidence. Keep in mind that forensic science at that time was also far less advanced than what we have today.
Right. And while the presumed murder weapon that Maddock was eventually found hidden in the attic or barn, it had been wiped clean, albeit not thoroughly, robbery was quickly ruled out as a primary motive since a significant amount of money was found untouched inside the house. Despite interviewing over 100 suspects over the years, the initial investigation and subsequent inquiries ultimately went nowhere, and no one was ever officially charged with these horrific crimes.
Looking back at those haunting details, they take on even greater weight when you consider the mishandling of the initial investigation. Young Cecilia's hair clutched in her hands, Maria the maid's incredibly brief presence at the farm, the dog's unusual behavior, the continued upkeep of the farm. These all point to a deeply personal and perplexing crime, and the lack of a clear conventional motive like robbery only deepens the mystery.
So let's try to understand the victims a little better, because their lives and relationships might offer some clues regarding a possible motive. Let's start with Andreas Gruber. He was 63, the head of the household. By many accounts, he was a harsh, controlling, and even abusive man within the family. He had a criminal record for incest with his own daughter, Victoria. Both served time, though Victoria's sentence was shorter. Locals generally disliked and even feared him, describing him as paranoid and unpleasant. This paints a picture of a man who may have created enemies or harbored deep resentments within his own family.
His wife, Cecilia Gruber Sr., was 72. We know significantly less about her. She's often portrayed as submissive, someone who remained in the background of the family dynamics. There is speculation, though, little concrete evidence that she may have been aware of and perhaps even tolerated the abuse that occurred within the family.
Their daughter, Victoria Gabriel, was 35. She was a widow. Her husband, Carl, was presumed dead during World War I, a detail that we'll come back to later as it figures into some theories. Unlike her parents, she was reportedly more sociable, even singing in the church choir. She also had a relationship with their neighbor, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, and there's a strong possibility he was the father of her youngest child, Joseph Vasily. Tragically, she was also a victim of her own father's incestuous abuse. You can see how complex and troubled the family's relationships were.
Young Cecilia Victoria's 7-year-old daughter seems to have been a child caught in an incredibly dark and isolated environment. Her final moments clutching her own hair in terror are a stark reminder of the unimaginable horror she must have experienced in her young life.
And then there's Joseph, who was only 2 years old. His paternity is a significant point of contention, and one that fuels many theories. He could have been Andreas' son, the result of the incestuous relationship with Victoria, or he could have been Lorenz Schlittenbauer's child. The uncertainty surrounding his parentage leads to theories that jealousy, shame, or even a desire to eliminate a reminder of past transgressions could have been central motives in this tragedy.
Finally, Maria Baumgartner, the 44-year-old maid. Her story is particularly tragic due to its brevity. She arrived at Hinterkaifeck on the very day she was murdered. Her sister even accompanied her to the farm, making her the last known outsider to see the family alive. She was hired after the previous maid left due to the unsettling atmosphere of the house, a detail that adds another layer of unease to the story.
When you piece together these family dynamics, it paints a really grim picture, doesn't it? Abuse, isolation, and layers upon layers of secrecy seem to have been the norm at Hinterkaifeck. The local community certainly gossiped about the incest and Yosef's uncertain paternity, and the family's extreme seclusion likely bred resentment and grudges, creating a fertile ground for potential devastating motives.
This brings us to the long list of key suspects who have been considered over the years. First and foremost for many is Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the neighbor and former lover of Victoria. He is a central figure in many of the prevailing theories, particularly given his possible paternity of Joseph and his undeniably suspicious behavior immediately following the discovery of the bodies. He was part of the search party, yet he somehow managed to unlock the front door, which was supposedly locked, and entered the house alone, claiming he was looking for young Joseph. He also reportedly acted strangely calm and even moved some of the bodies, which immediately raised suspicion among the other searchers. So what do you make of that sequence of actions?
It certainly seems odd, doesn't it? And significantly, even modern police students in 2007, after reviewing the cold case with contemporary profiling techniques, concluded that Schlittenbauer was the most likely suspect, although they withheld his name publicly out of respect for his living descendants. Possible motives that have been suggested for him include jealousy over Joseph's paternity, anger or resentment towards Victoria or the Grubers, or perhaps shame related to his relationship with Victoria in such a close-knit community.
Another prominent, although more speculative, suspect is Karl Gabriel, Victoria's husband, who was presumed dead during World War I. His body was never recovered, which has led to various theories that he might have survived and returned to Hinterkaifeck in secret. The idea here is that he could have discovered Joseph realized the child wasn't his and potentially learned about the incestuous relationship between Andreas and Victoria and sought revenge on the entire family. While this theory has gained some traction over the years, it's important to note that it lacks concrete evidence and leans towards a more conspiratorial interpretation of events.
Then you have the previous maid, who fled the farm 6 months before the murders occurred, explicitly citing a haunted house and a malevolent presence as her reasons for leaving. Some have wondered if she perhaps witnessed something or had some knowledge of something sinister happening at Hinterkaifeck that she was too afraid to reveal at the time. It's another unsettling piece of the puzzle to consider.
The theory of unknown vagrants or soldiers passing through the area has also been considered. The isolation of the farm certainly made it a potential target for opportunistic crime. However, the lack of any clear signs of robbery and the seemingly personal nature of the brutal killings make this theory less probable in the eyes of many investigators. Furthermore, the fact that the killer or killers apparently stayed on the property for days after the murders is highly unusual for a random act of violence committed by outsiders.
There's also the theory that involves brothers Karl and Andreas S. In the 1970s, a woman claimed her mother had confessed on her deathbed that her brothers were the perpetrators of the Hinterkaifeck murders. This alleged confession even included a detail that Andreas had regretted losing his penknife at the scene. Interestingly, a penknife was indeed found during the demolition of the farmhouse many years later, but unfortunately it could never be definitively linked to these brothers or to the crime itself.
The Gump brothers are another set of individuals who have been considered as potential suspects. This theory is largely based on alleged cryptic remarks they made years after the murders that some interpreted as hints of their involvement. Their familiarity with farm tools has also been mentioned. However, as with many of these leads, there is a significant lack of solid corroborating evidence to support their involvement. Peter Weber is another name that surfaces testimony from a coworker claimed that Weber had spoken about killing the old man at Hinterkaifeck for money, and he also seemed to have some knowledge of the family's affairs.
And let's not forget the Bischler brothers, Anton and Karl, along with Georg Siegel. The former maid who left before the murders reportedly harbored suspicions about them. Anton Bischler was known to be familiar with the Hinterkaifeck farm, had allegedly spoken negatively about the family in the past. And a particularly eerie detail is that the farm dog, which was known to bark at almost everyone, reportedly never barked at Anton Bischler. Georg Siegel had previously worked at
Finally, the Thaler brothers have also been mentioned in connection with the case. The former maid stated that Joseph Thaler had asked her questions about the Gruber family and their financial situation, noting that another unidentified person was present during these inquiries. All these individuals and theories highlight the wide net that investigators cast, yet ultimately came up empty-handed.
One of the more recent and quite intriguing theories that has emerged involves a man named Paul Mueller, a German migrant, who was believed by some researchers to have been a serial killer operating in the United States around the turn of the 20th century. Author Bill James, in his book The Man from the Train, draws some striking parallels between Mueller's suspected crimes in the U.S., which often involved isolated families, and the use of a pickaxe as a weapon, and the circumstances of the Hinterkaifeck murders. He suggests that Mueller might have returned to Germany around 1912 after his pattern of killings in the U.S. began to attract too much attention. The similarities in the nature of the crimes, isolated families, a blunt weapon like a pickaxe, or mattock bodies, sometimes being stacked and no apparent motive of robbery, are certainly compelling.
It's a thought-provoking theory, especially when you consider the timeline and some of the unusual details of the Hinterkaifeck case. Now let's touch upon some of the popular theories and myths that have developed around this enduring mystery. The idea that the killer might have actually been living in the attic of the farmhouse before the murders took place gained traction due to those reported unexplained footsteps in the attic and the subsequent discovery of disturbed straw in that area. It certainly adds a chilling dimension to the events leading up to the crime.
And as we've discussed, the evidence strongly suggests that the killer or killers stayed on the farm for a significant period after the murders, given the continued care of the animals and the consumption of food. The disturbing and persistent theory that young Joseph was the son of incest between Andreas and Victoria also continues to fuel speculation about potential motives rooted in deep-seated shame retribution, or a desire to eliminate the physical embodiment of a terrible secret.
The pervasive feeling that the house itself was somehow cursed, a sentiment echoed by the previous maid's dramatic departure and lingering whispers within the local community, certainly adds a layer of the uncanny and almost supernatural to this already horrific tragedy. And the not-so-dead husband theory, with Carl Gabriel potentially returning from the war unexpectedly, continues to capture the imagination of some, offering a classic motive of revenge.
The sheer brutality of the crime, coupled with the seemingly organized way in which the victims were killed, has led to the theory of a planned massacre carried out by a group of individuals, perhaps suggesting shared motives or a coordinated effort. There's even the more obscure and rather fantastical theory of a doppelganger killer, which taps into German folklore and speaks more to the unsettling and inexplicable nature of the case than offering a plausible explanation.
And we can't overlook the persistent mystery surrounding the mattock itself. Its careful cleaning and subsequent hiding strongly suggest a familiarity with the farm and a deliberate attempt to conceal the weapon, hinting that the killer was likely not a complete stranger to the property or the victims.
The case truly is a labyrinth of creepy details and unanswered clues. That Munich newspaper appearing with absolutely no explanation as to how it got there. The single set of footprints in the snow leading directly to the house, but not away, as if someone vanished into thin air. The family dog, usually known to be quite aggressive, being found injured but alive, and reportedly barking incessantly on the night of the murders. The way the bodies were meticulously stacked and covered with hay in the barn, almost in a ritualistic manner.
And the fact that the house was locked, yet the keys were nowhere to be found, and Schlittenbauer's seemingly effortless access remains unexplained. The fresh smoke that was seen coming from the chimney for days after the family was known to be dead. The unsettling detail that parts of the house appeared to have been cleaned up after the murders, and of course the truly heartbreaking image of little Cecilia's final moments clutching her own hair in terror. The murder weapon itself hidden away and not discovered until a year later, and the ultimate finality of the farmhouse being torn down almost as if to try and erase the horrific events that transpired there.
It's a truly disturbing tapestry of unsettling elements. Perhaps we can try to weave some of these threads together with a brief reimagining of that fateful night, March 31st, 1922. Picture the late afternoon quiet descending over the isolated farm of Hinterkaifeck. The only visible sign of an outsider is that single mysterious set of footprints leading from the edge of the woods directly towards the silent farmhouse. Inside, the family goes about their normal evening routines, completely unaware of the unseen presence that may already be lurking, perhaps hidden in the shadows of the attic or the darkness of the barn.
As dusk deepens and the darkness gathers around the isolated farm, the unthinkable begins to unfold. One by one, the adult members of the family are lured out to the barn, perhaps by a feigned animal in distress or some other clever deception. Andreas likely goes first, the head of the household, investigating a potential problem. Then Cecilia Sr. follows. Victoria, perhaps growing increasingly concerned by the absence of her parents, is next. Finally, young Cizia, who may have witnessed something or was simply caught in the horrific sequence of events, is dragged to her terrifying end. In the darkness of the barn, the mattock falls repeatedly.
Inside the farmhouse, young Joseph sleeps soundly in his crib, completely oblivious to the carnage unfolding just a few feet away. The killer, having committed the unspeakable acts in the barn, then silently enters the house. Maria Baumgartner, the new maid, who just arrived, likely hears a disturbance and is met with the same brutal and merciless fate. Then the innocent 2-year-old, utterly defenseless and asleep, becomes the final victim. The farmhouse, once a place of life and family, is now a silent tomb. But the horror doesn't end with the murders themselves.
For the next 3 chilling days, an eerie and disturbing semblance of normal life continues at Hinterkaifeck. Smoke eerily curls from the chimney into the silent sky. The farm animals are tended to. Food is prepared and consumed within the house of death. The killer or killers remain on the property, coexisting with their victims in a truly macabre and unsettling tableau. The silence stretches until April 4th, when the unexpected arrival of the mechanic finally shatters the facade and brings the gruesome reality to light. The unsolved mystery of Hinterkaifeck is then etched into the annals of crime history. No arrests were ever made, the farmhouse was eventually demolished, and even the victims' skulls, which were sent away for analysis in the hopes of finding some clue, were tragically lost during the chaos of World War II.
The core questions, as you can see, remain as potent and as frustratingly unanswered today as they were back in 1922. Who is the killer? What singular or perhaps multiple motives drove such extreme and brutal violence? And how could someone or some group of people have lived alongside the bodies of their victims for days, continuing the routines of daily life?
It is precisely this inscrutability, this lack of definitive answers, that fuels the enduring and morbid fascination with the Hinterkaifeck murders. The sheer isolation of the farm, the exceptionally brutal nature of the killings, and the complete absence of a satisfying resolution have cemented Hinterkaifeck's place as one of Germany's most haunting and persistently discussed unsolved crimes. Its cultural impact is undeniable, inspiring countless books, numerous documentaries, and of course, deep dives like this one. Even fictionalized accounts such as the novel Ten Nud have brought the chilling story to new generations, highlighting its lasting grip on the public imagination.
Even modern attempts to finally shed light on this century-old mystery, such as the 2007 review conducted by students at a police academy, while they did identify a likely suspect based on contemporary criminal profiling techniques, ultimately concluded that a definitive resolution to the case is now sadly impossible. The passage of time and the mishandling of the initial investigation have simply erased too much of the crucial evidence.
So as we conclude this deep dive into the enduring enigma that is Hinterkaifeck, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Given the sheer number of theories that have been proposed, the multitude of bizarre and unsettling details surrounding the case, and the overall haunting atmosphere that clings to this crime, even after so many years, what single piece of evidence or specific suspect behavior strikes you as the most telling, the most significant clue? And perhaps more importantly, why do you think this tragic and perplexing story continues to haunt our collective imagination more than a century after it occurred? If this deep dive has sparked your curiosity further, I strongly encourage you to explore the source material yourself. There are undoubtedly countless more layers to uncover in this truly chilling and unforgettable mystery.
We'll see you on the next deep dive.
See you then.
Thanks for listening to Dark Deeds and Conspiracy. If this story intrigued you, tap the like and subscribe buttons. It helps more than you know. Got a case you want us to cover? Drop it in the comments. New episodes posted on Tuesdays. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and never stop searching for the truth.